The wind moved through the cottonwoods like a low, grieving breath, carrying with it the dry smell of dust, sap and old sorrow. Caleb Hart rode slowly along the river's edge, his horse picking its way over stones, polished smooth by years of passing water. This land had belonged to silence long before it had ever belonged to men. The ranch sat miles behind him now, a lonely spread of weather-beaten fences and a house that groaned at night like an old man remembering too much. Caleb preferred the river. It didn't ask questions. It didn't remind him of what he'd lost. He hadn't meant to ride this far north. The morning had started like any other. Coffee gone bitter on the stove, the ache in his shoulder flaring with the cold, the memory of a woman's laughter surfacing uninvited and unwelcome. He had saddled his horse out of habit more than purpose, letting the animal choose the path as much as he did. That was how loneliness worked. It made decisions for you quietly, until one day you realized you were somewhere you never meant to be. That was when he saw the tree. It stood apart from the others, a tall sycamore with pale, scarred bark, its branches stretching like pleading arms toward the sky. At first, Caleb noticed the horse before anything else, an Apache pony, ribs showing, reins trailing in the dirt. The animal stood unnaturally still, head low, as if it too were afraid to move. Caleb slowed, his hand tightening on the reins. Something in the air felt wrong, heavier than silence. Then he saw her. She hung where the largest branch bent outward, not swinging, not moving, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She was young, too young for the cruelty written into the scene before him. Her dark hair spilled down her back, tangled with leaves. Her feet barely brushed the trunk, toes scraping bark. And tied around her neck, hanging against her chest, was a rough piece of wood, the words carved deep and uneven. "White man don't forgive." For a moment, Caleb could not breathe. His mind rejected what his eyes were telling him. This land had seen violence. He knew that better than most, but this was a message, a warning, a wound meant to fester. His first instinct was fear, sharp and animal. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone might still be near. His second instinct was guilt, heavy and old, settling into his bones like winter. He slid from his horse slowly, every movement deliberate, his heart pounding so hard it drowned out the river. The girl's chest, he strained to see it praying, rose just barely, a fragile flutter like a bird trapped behind ribs. She was alive. That realization broke whatever spell had frozen him in place. Caleb moved without thinking then, boots pounding against earth, hands shaking as he reached for his knife. Up close, he could see how thin she was, how the rope had already burned into her skin. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, lips cracked and dry. She smelled of sweat, dust, and fear. "I've got you," he muttered, though he didn't know if he was saying it to her or to himself. "I've got you." He cut the rope in one clean motion and caught her weight as she fell, her body lighter than it should have been, lighter than any living person had a right to be. He lowered her to the ground carefully, laying her on his coat, hands trembling as he checked her breathing. It was shallow, uneven, but it was there. Only then did he allow himself to look at the sign again. The words burned into him. They weren't just meant for her. They were meant for him, for every man who looked like him, for a history written in blood and broken promises. Caleb had grown up hearing stories. Some whispered, some shouted about the Apache, about wars and raids and reprisals. But none of that explained the quiet brutality of a child, being left to die as a warning. He tore the sign from the cord around her neck and threw it into the river. The wood hit the water with a dull splash and disappeared, the current carrying it away as if trying, belatedly, to erase the crime. The girl stirred then, a soft sound escaping her throat. Her eyes fluttered open fully this time, dark and sharp with terror. She tried to move, tried to push away, her hands weak but frantic. "No," Caleb said quickly, stepping back, raising his hands so she could see them. "No, easy. I won't hurt you." She stared at him, her gaze flicking over his clothes, his skin, the horse behind him. The fear in her eyes deepened, and with it something else, hatred, taught and reinforced, until it felt like truth. She tried to sit up and cried out, her body betraying her. "Please," he said, the word rough in his throat. "You're safe. I swear it." The lie tasted bitter because he didn't know if it was true. Not in this land. Not in this time. Safety was a fragile thing, easily broken. She spoke then, her voice hoarse, her English broken but clear enough. "You should not save me." The words struck him harder than any accusation. "Why?" he asked quietly. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. They said, "If white man touch rope, more blood come. More death." Caleb swallowed. He thought of his empty house, of the grave behind the church, of all the ways blood had already come, again and again, whether he acted or not. "Maybe," he said softly, "but I couldn't leave you." She watched him as if trying to decide whether that made him brave or foolish, or simply another kind of cruel. After a long moment, her eyes closed, exhaustion winning over fear. Her head lolled to the side, breath still shallow. Caleb exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He wrapped her gently, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. That frightened him more than anything else. As he carried her toward his horse, the wind shifted, rustling the sycamore's leaves. For the first time in years, Caleb Hart felt the land watching him, not with indifference, but with judgment. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his chest, that whatever life he'd been living until this moment was over, because some rescues did not end when the rope was cut. They were only the beginning. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than it ever had before, as if the land itself were stretching the distance in warning. Caleb held the girl against his chest, one arm locked around her thin back, the other steadying the reins. Her head rested beneath his chin, her breath faint and warm against his neck. Every shallow inhale felt like a promise that could break at any moment. He rode carefully, avoiding rough ground, whispering to the horse as though sound alone might keep death at bay. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body tensing whenever the horse stumbled, her fingers clutching his shirt as if she feared falling back into the sky. Once her eyes opened and fixed on the horizon, not seeing it, her lips moving soundlessly. He wondered what she saw there, faces, fire, a rope swinging in her memory. By the time the ranch came into view, dusk had begun to bleed into the sky, the sun dragging long shadows across the plain. The house stood just as he had left it that morning, small, crooked, stubbornly upright against the years. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, no light glowed in the windows. It looked abandoned, like a place forgotten by God. Caleb felt a familiar pang in his chest, sharper now that he was bringing someone else into that loneliness. He dismounted carefully and carried her inside. The house smelled of old wood, coffee grounds, and dust. He laid her on the narrow bed in the back room, the one he never used anymore, pulling clean blankets from the chest at the foot. Her skin was cold despite the warmth of the day, and he cursed himself for not riding faster. He built a fire with shaking hands, the crackle of flames sounding too loud in the quiet. He fetched water and pressed it gently to her lips. She swallowed weakly, coughed, then turned her face away. Her eyes opened again, wary, searching. She looked around the room, taking in the walls, the simple furniture, the cross hanging crooked above the door. "This is my home," Caleb said, unsure why he felt the need to explain. "You can rest here." She stared at him for a long moment. "Why?" she asked. The question followed him like a ghost. Why had he cut the rope? Why had he brought her here? Why did his chest ache as if something long dead had stirred? He had no answer that would satisfy either of them. "Because you were alone," he said finally. She turned her face toward the wall, as if that answer hurt more than any other. He saw the tracks of tears on her cheeks then, shining briefly in the firelight before she wiped them away with the back of her hand. Pride lived in her, fierce and unbroken even now. Caleb stepped back, giving her space. He moved about the house quietly, heating broth, tearing cloth into bandages. As he worked, the weight of what he'd done settled over him. Someone had left her, hanging as a warning. Someone would notice she was gone, and when they did, they would look for her. They would come. He cleaned the rope burns on her neck as gently as he could. She flinched but did not cry out. Her jaw remained set, her eyes fixed on a point beyond him. When he finished, she spoke again, her voice steadier now. "My name is Nalin," she said. He paused, surprised by the offering. "Caleb," he replied. "Caleb Hart." She repeated it quietly, testing the sound, then nodded once, as if committing it to memory. "You should send me away," she said. "They will kill you." Caleb met her gaze. "Who?" She hesitated. "Men who wear hate like clothes," she said finally, "and men who say they are law but forget justice." He knew both kinds. He had seen them ride through town with their heads high and their hands never clean. He had kept his distance all his life, believing that staying quiet was the same as staying innocent. Looking at Nalin now, he understood how wrong that belief had been. "I won't send you away," he said. "Not tonight." She closed her eyes again, exhaustion pulling her under. Caleb sat in the chair beside the bed long after she slept, listening to the wind rattle the windows, the fire popping softly. His thoughts wandered to the past, to the day he'd buried his wife, to the way the town had looked at him afterward, as if grief were contagious. He had learned then what it felt like to be alone among people. Outside, a coyote howled, the sound thin and lonely. Caleb rose and checked the doors, the windows, the rifle hanging above the mantel. He had not touched that gun in years. Tonight he loaded it and set it by the door. When dawn finally crept in, pale and uncertain, Nalin woke with a start. She reached for her neck, her eyes wild, then stilled when she saw where she was. Caleb was already awake, watching her from the doorway. "You're still here," she said. "So are you," he replied. For the first time, something like confusion crossed her face. The world had taught her one truth carved deep and painful. His presence challenged it, and that frightened her more than hatred ever had. Outside, hoofbeats sounded faintly in the distance. Caleb's jaw tightened. The past had found him, and this time it had a face and a name, sleeping in the next room. The hoofbeats faded as suddenly as they had appeared, swallowed by distance and wind. But the tension they left behind lingered like smoke in the room. Caleb stood motionless, listening long after the sound was gone, his hand resting on the rifle. Nalin watched him from the bed, her body rigid, every sense sharpened by fear. She had learned young and never forgotten. "They are near," she said quietly. "Riders pass this way sometimes," Caleb replied, though he did not fully believe his own words. He had chosen this land because it was far from roads, far from eyes. Morning did not bring peace. It brought clarity, sharp as frost. Caleb stood at the window watching the light crawl across the yard, turning the dust pale and unforgiving. The hoofbeats he'd heard before dawn had faded into the hills, but their echo remained, vibrating in his bones. He knew that sound. Riders who did not announce themselves rarely did so by accident. They were measuring, marking, remembering. The land carried those memories better than any man. Behind him, the house breathed, wood settling, fire dying down to embers. Nalin slept fitfully in the back room, her breath shallow, her body tensing with dreams that would not loosen their grip. Caleb had sat through the night again, cleaning his rifle twice without meaning to, stopping each time the floor creaked beneath her shifting weight. He had promised her safety without knowing what it would cost. Now dawn asked him to pay. He stepped outside, boots crunching softly, and walked the perimeter of the house. Tracks cut across the hard, earth near the river bend, fresh, enough to shine where the ground had been broken. 3 horses, one of them shod, the others not. That told him more than he liked. It meant men who worked for money and men who believed they were owed something more. Together, they made a kind of certainty. When he returned inside, Nalin was sitting up, blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her eyes followed him, alert despite the exhaustion still clinging to her face. She had braided her hair with steady hands, a small, defiant order imposed on a world that had tried to leave her broken. "They came," she said, not asking. "Close enough," Caleb replied. She nodded once. "They will come again." "Yes." A silence settled between them, heavier now because it was shared. Caleb set a bowl of broth on the table and slid it toward her. She hesitated, then drank, eyes never leaving his face. Trust, he understood, was not a thing you gave. It was something you tested piece by piece, until either it held or it cut you open. "Why did they hang you?" he asked gently. Her hands tightened around the bowl. For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly, "Because my father would not sell." Caleb felt the words land like stones. "Sell what?" Land, she said. Water, passage. Her gaze drifted to the window. My people live where the river bends, where the cottonwoods grow thick. They wanted it. He said no. And you? I was the message, she said. No bitterness, no tears, just fact. Caleb turned away so she wouldn't see what that answer did to him. He had seen men justify worse for less. He had believed once that staying out of such things kept your hands clean. Now he knew better. Clean hands could still be empty. There's a town 2 days south, he said. Marshal there isn't fond of trouble. Nalin looked at him as if he had suggested hiding from the sun. Law does not see us, she said. Only land. He had no answer to that. He had lived long enough among white men to know how easily justice narrowed its gaze. Instead, he said, then we don't go south. She studied him, searching for the edge of his resolve. They will not stop. I know. The decision settled between them, unspoken but heavy. To keep her here was to invite violence. To send her away was to finish what the rope had begun. Caleb felt the weight of his past pressing in, the years of choosing the smaller wrong, because it was easier to live with. He stood straighter, as if the act itself might set something right. I'll take you home, he said. Her breath caught. You don't know where... I'll learn, he interrupted. And I won't ride you into the open. Suspicion flickered in her eyes, sharp and protective. Why would you do this? Because he had lost someone once and done nothing but mourn. Because the land remembered, and so did he. Because some lines, once crossed, could not be stepped back over without becoming less than a man. He chose the simplest truth. Because you shouldn't be alone. They prepared quickly. Caleb packed dried meat, water skins, blankets. He saddled the spare horse and adjusted it to fit her slight frame. When he turned back, she was standing near the door, the light catching the faint bruises on her neck. She met his gaze without flinching. Outside, the world waited, wide, watchful, and indifferent. They mounted and rode north, keeping to the trees. The river always just within earshot. The land folded around them, offering concealment where it could, danger where it would. More than once, Caleb felt eyes on his back, the prickle of being measured again. By midday, they reached a narrow pass where rock rose close and the path tightened. Caleb slowed, hand lifting in warning. The smell of smoke drifted faintly on the air. Nalin stiffened. They are near. Caleb nodded. He dismounted silently, leading the horses off the trail and into the brush. He checked his rifle, the click of the bolt sounding too loud in his ears. He had hoped for time. Hope, he was learning, was a luxury. From the ridge above, voices carried, men laughing, careless, certain. Caleb felt the old fear rise, then settle into something harder. He thought of the sign sinking into the river, of the promise he had made without words. He took a breath, steadying himself. Whatever came next, the rope would not have the last word. Caleb crouched low among the scrub oak, the smell of dust and crushed leaves sharp in his nose. The voices above them drifted closer, boots scraping stone, the careless confidence of men who believed the world would step aside for them. Nalin knelt beside him, silent as shadow, her hand resting on the ground as if drawing strength from it. Her eyes were fixed on the narrow path ahead, not with fear alone, but with a knowledge older than maps. There are 4, she whispered. Maybe 5. Caleb nodded once. His pulse thudded in his ears, but his hands were steady. He had hunted these hills for years, tracking deer and stray cattle, learning where sound traveled and where it died. He had never planned to use that knowledge against men. Life rarely asked permission. The first rider appeared around the bend, leading his horse, rifle slung loose over his shoulder. He stopped suddenly, scanning the ground. Caleb saw the moment suspicion tightened the man's posture, saw his gaze drop to the disturbed dirt near the trail. Someone's been through here, the man called out. Caleb waited. He let the man step closer, let certainty turn into unease. When the rider bent to examine the tracks, Caleb rose just enough to bring the rifle to his shoulder. Drop it, Caleb said. The sound of his voice cut clean through the pass. The man froze, then slowly straightened, eyes widening as he saw the gun trained on him. Behind him, the others stopped laughing. Hands went to weapons. Easy, one of them said. No need for trouble. You're already standing in it, Caleb replied. They were rough men, sunburned faces, eyes hard from choosing cruelty too often. One of them smiled thinly, a smile that held no warmth. "We're looking for an Apache girl," he said. "Ran off. Belongs to someone." Nalin's breath hitched beside Caleb. He felt it like a tremor through the earth. His voice stayed even. "She doesn't belong to anyone." The man's smile faded. "That's so, because there's a reward for her. Alive or—" Caleb fired. The shot cracked through the pass, sharp and final. The bullet struck the rock inches from the man's head, spraying stone and dust. Horses reared, men shouted, chaos erupting where calm had stood seconds before. "Last warning," Caleb said. "Turn around." One of the riders reached for his gun anyway. Nalin moved before Caleb could shout. She sprang up, a stone already in her hand, and hurled it with practiced force. It struck the man's wrist, sending his pistol clattering to the ground. Surprise flashed across his face, followed by rage. "That's her!" someone yelled. The men surged forward, and the moment broke. Caleb fired again, this time into the ground at their feet, forcing them back. He grabbed Nalin's arm and pulled her deeper into the brush. Moving fast, low, the horses whinnying behind them. Bullets tore through branches above their heads, leaves raining down. Caleb felt the heat of one pass close to his shoulder. They ran until the world narrowed to breath, and blood pounding in his ears. When they stopped, hidden in a ravine thick with willow, Caleb pressed his hand over Nalin's mouth, listening. Shouts echoed faintly, then faded. The men were arguing now, their confidence cracked. "They won't follow far," Caleb murmured. "Not into this." Nalin nodded, eyes bright, fierce. "You risked your life." "So did you." For a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Not trust yet, but a beginning. They moved again when the sun dipped low, taking paths only animals used, skirting the edges of danger. By nightfall, the land changed. The air grew cooler. The cottonwoods thickened, their leaves whispering in a language Nalin seemed to understand. She slowed, her posture shifting, as if she were Caleb said. "They were already hunting her. They wear badges when it suits them," Taza continued. "And when it does not, they wear nothing at all." Caleb felt the truth of that like a bruise. He thought of the tracks by his house, the shod horse among the unshod. "They'll keep coming as long as they believe they can. And you?" Taza asked. "What will you do when they come with papers and guns and words they call law?" Caleb did not answer at once. He looked at Nalin, at the way she stood among her people. Smaller than many, yet unbroken. He thought of his ranch, his fences, the long habit of keeping his head down and his heart closed. He understood now that neutrality had been a choice all along. "I'll stand where I stood before," he said finally. "Between them and what they want." A murmur rippled through the camp. Some faces hardened, others softened, wary hope flickering like firelight. Taza studied him a long time. Then he gestured toward the river. "This land remembers," he said. "It remembers promises broken and blood spilled. If you stand here, it will remember you too." "I know," Caleb said. They let him stay the night. Not as a guest, not as a prisoner, something in between, shaped by caution and the thin thread of gratitude. He sat by a small fire at the camp's edge, listening to the river speak in its steady voice. Nalin came to him once, bringing a cup of water. She did not smile. She did not thank him. She sat, and that was enough. "When they come," she said softly, "it will be soon." "I'll be ready," Caleb replied. She looked at him, really looked, as if weighing the man against the promise he had made. "You should be afraid," she said. "I am," he answered, "but I'm still here." Dawn broke pale and cold. Riders appeared at the far ridge as the light climbed, too far to see faces, close enough to know intent. The camp stirred, quiet and efficient, like a body waking to pain it knew well. Boughs were strung. Fires were banked. Children were moved deeper into the trees. Caleb stood and took his place beside Taza at the river's edge. He felt the land under his boots, felt its long memory settle around him like a judgment that was also a chance. Across the water a voice called out, sharp with authority. Papers were raised. Demands were made. Names were spoken, twisted into threats. Taza did not answer. Caleb stepped forward instead. "Turn back," he said, his voice carrying across the river. "This ends here." For a heartbeat the world held still. The riders, the river, the watching trees. Then a laugh broke out, ugly and sure. A hand moved toward a holster, and in that instant, Caleb knew with a clarity that surprised him, whatever came next, he would not look away. He would not choose the smaller wrong. He would stand and the land would remember. The first shot cracked the morning open. It was not the last. But when the smoke cleared hours later, the river still ran, the cottonwoods still whispered, and Narlin still stood among her. People alive. The men who had come to take were gone, some carried away by their own, others by consequence. Papers lay soaked and unreadable at the water's edge. Taza turned to Caleb then. "The rope did not have the last word," he said. Caleb nodded, the truth of it settling deep. He did not know what place he would have in this land tomorrow. He only knew that the silence he had once called peace was gone, and in its place stood something harder, something earned. The land did not return to quiet after the gunfire faded. Silence came later, cautiously like an animal testing the wind. Smoke thinned and drifted away. Blood darkened the sand at the river's edge, and then thinned too, carried off grain by the current. What remained was not peace.